is actually meant by it in a lot of ways. And so when we get to that, really the only way that I think in a lot of ways we can get to it is through those other dimensions. And in a lot of relationships that I see, because of how we framed it up in a pyramid, they start with the point and they try to build upward. And most of the gravity is working against them when people tend to define intimacy and not understand that it takes, and it's built upon all these other blocks that we've been walking our way through. So so we'll take some time to go over that today, and then next week is the final one, and that's the one that I've entitled Living Free. And so it's where I'm putting it all together to kind of draw it to a close as far as, okay, so what from here on out? What do we do? You know, how do we live life differently? The thing is, one of the challenges I see consistently in doing this class is you walk out believing lots of things and doing nothing about it. And the belief is little more good than than just a piece of knowledge that you've curated. And so the challenge is all right, so it's one thing to know something, it's one thing to believe something, it's quite another to make choices based on it. And that's where our behavior comes in, and that's oftentimes where the disconnect comes in, is that I had somebody once ask me, so how do you trust? And the lady who asked me that, it was like she was waiting for 12 quick steps to trusting people. And the reality is that we still have to choose and we still have to act. And when we do that, we find out, and we don't really want to find out. We would rather either assume everybody's trustworthy, or on the flip side, assume no one is trustworthy. And with that, we conduct our lives accordingly, and that really is a part of what we're looking at throughout all of these kind of characteristics or dimensions of what I call, we can now understand as grace-filled relationships and what they look like. We finished talking about with conflict and before the break, and we don't see much grace in conflict. And it's the basis on which a lot of us flee from connection because of the threat that it holds. And that is a big part, I think, of understanding why intimacy is the crowning jewel, if you will, of all of these things that we've been walking through, and why it's so hard to get to it. Because each of you in your own way, whatever you've written in your journals and things like that I have read, there are stumbling blocks literally along that path. There are some things you find very hard to get through, and then other things it's like, yeah, that's not too bad. I think I'm almost there. But there are lots of things that I think the worst part about growth is the repetition that's needed. Not so much the perfection, but the repetition. And we don't like the repetition. We don't like having to do it again and give it another shot, and maybe even the potential. The minute I make it, give it a shot, if you will, the potential is I won't succeed. And yeah, there is that potential. But if we see that as a sign of failure, it's going to be virtually assured I'll learn nothing. And that is very much a part of this. So, so let me land the plane today with the traits, and then we'll get into kind of putting it all together next week. But let me pray. Father, thank you for this day. Thanks for the sunshine and the opportunity that you've given us, these 15 weeks just to walk through the contours and the landscape of our heart and the things that we need to pay attention to, that we need to come back to perhaps, just to think about, to meditate on, to trust your heart, even when we don't feel like it's really going to turn out well. No matter what, you haven't promised us a storm-free life. You've just promised us a storm-proof life. And help us to walk with that kind of trust in our hearts, to walk into relationships and do things differently, even if in small ways, because it doesn't take very much of a change to make a huge change later on. So thank you for your love, for your patience, and just for your pursuit of us. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so in Intimacy. Let me do a quick review again. And like I said, all of these things are building ultimately to the last but not least of these, and that's intimacy. We left off at conflict, and the thing to keep in mind is you can't have intimacy without truth. You can't have intimacy without having trust in a relationship. So these things are things that are, to some degree, are non-negotiables. If I try to I got truth down, I got the trust down, but not have any boundaries, then I'm setting the stage for a variety of other issues. If I got that down, but I get to forgiveness and say, I'm never going to forgive that person, I don't care what they say or do, then take another drink of the poison and wait for the rat to die. Because that's the very nature of forgiveness. It's loosening my grip on them and releasing them of my demand that they change. And we look through and walk through the various dimensions of that. And then finally, conflict. We run from conflict and we run from intimacy. Because I said last time when we walked into and talked about conflict is the gateway to intimacy. And we don't see it that way. We see conflict as a threat to intimacy. And because of that, then, we never end up achieving it. So the thing I want to kind of nail down is, and I asked Buzz Lightyear to help me with this, is to intimacy and beyond and what that looks like. Because the nature of intimacy is going to be, it's a moment. It is not an upward trending line to the right all the time. It is not. It is a moment in time, and because we have false expectations around what intimacy is supposed to look like, because of that, we never find it. We find false intimacies, things that we can engineer or that we can have that's safe, or any number of things like that, but it is very much a part of the fact that as humans, it is only going to be a moment. And we string those moments together over time, and in between those moments are pretty dramatic things that often happen, whether it's adversity or other forms of suffering or trauma or crises that we survive or other things like that. Those are the moments in between. And those are the things that each kind of investment in intimacy in that moment is what builds a stronger and stronger relationship. And you can see that in long-lasting relationships, is that when you talk to the people that have had a relationship for a long time, they talk about not only their enduring love for one another, but they talk about the adversity and suffering and the things that they've gone through and made it through together. And that is equally as much of a part of the depth of field that they bring with them when they talk about relationships that way. So the question we have to ask is, what space are you going to live in? Are you going to live in the space in your head, or are you going to live in the space between you and somebody else? Because it is the most dangerous space you will ever see or experience. And that's exactly why we spend so little time in it. We don't ask people what they're thinking. We think for them. That's the difference. And so when I live in the space between us, I invite the other person to join me there in questions, in invitations, in opportunities to find out more about what they're thinking in the space in their head. It is far safer in the space in our heads, always. That's why we like it there so well. But it is also very safe in a prison cell. And we can make that same choice as far as the things that we experience. So what is it? So I had a good friend of mine many years ago. He said, you know what intimacy is? It's into me, see. That's intimacy. And I allow someone to see where I'm at. And the only way they can do that is if I open the doors. They are not going to, the best friends, the safest friends, are not going to crash the doors. And so I have to choose whether to open that window or that door so they can know about what it is we're experiencing. They don't have to fix it. I'm just asking them to know about it. And that's what intimacy is. Merriam-Webster defines it this way: making something of a personal or private nature known, especially publicly or formally. So intimacy is allowing people to see us as we are. Not as we should be, but as we are. And the remarkable miracle that happens when that happens is that we end up being met with grace that we can't experience internally ourselves. Because people are very willing, just like any of us, they are very willing to give grace. They may not do it to themselves, but they are great at giving grace to other people. And so when we make that known to them, then more often than not, we are met with grace. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, we are more afraid of grace than we are of criticism, because we expect one, we don't expect the other. And we can't control the other, namely grace. So the simplest way to think about intimacy is being known and knowing others. And when I say knowing, I mean in the fullest sense of the term, not a curated information about someone. You can't really know someone if you haven't interacted with them directly. You can read everything you want about them, their life, everything. But that doesn't mean you know them. And the biggest challenge is to what degree do I know myself? But at the same time, being known and knowing others is all based almost entirely on volition. I have to choose. I have to choose to ask or request to know somebody else. If they say no, then I best abide by the answer. I don't like it, but I best abide by the answer. And the same thing is true with requests from other people. So one of the biggest challenges we have is what I just said. If somebody asks to know me and I have to answer the question, how well do I even know myself? One of the challenges that you face in doing journals in all of my classes is that I'm asking you to wander the landscape of your own heart, for not only to share with somebody, namely me at that moment, but to share with anyone else. You cannot share what you do not see. And so I have to ask myself the question, how well do I know myself? Because what follows on beyond that, if I've not done the work necessary to know myself, then what is it that I have to share with other people? Do I share the appearance that I've cultivated all my time in creating, or do I share with them the actual person that I have come to know? I may not like it very much, but I at least have come to know it. And that's a big part of the nature of relationships and intimacy. I am limited in my intimacy if I have not taken the time to know myself, because what I share is not consistent with what is there. And when that happens, we're in trouble, because the person will take what we say, and when they take that, we can always, even if I give somebody an appearance of who I am, the person who I want to be, if I show them that and they believe that and they stay in relationship and love that, then what's my escape hatch? Well, that's not really me. They're not really loving the person I really am, because I've shown them something else. And so the challenge, of course, is that if somebody is going to love me, I want them to love me as I am, not as I have created the image of me to be. Because if they love the image, that's all it is. If they love me, it is the real thing. And that is what is so terrifying, I think, in so many cases. So there are lots of obstacles. Intimacy sounds great, but there are a lot more obstacles than we know, partly because of our lack of trust of people and our lack of trust of ourselves, too. So ultimately, I cannot give away what I don't own. I can't. I can steal it from someone else, but I can't give away what I don't own, even about myself. And that's what's key. There's been so many times that I have been in doing premarital counseling with couples and things like that, where I say this very thing. How can you give away a heart that you don't own? And that requires work, that requires reflection, that requires asking hard questions or having somebody ask them to help me get to those places that I'm afraid of, whatever that might be. And so when it comes right down to it, if I don't own my heart, then I'm going to have a tough time giving it away to anyone. And in a lot of cases, we get so committed to the stained glass self, we give them that. And then we stay safe, but then we remain unknown and remain isolated. And we don't like that feeling either. It's the disconnection that Brene talks about all the time, or the lack of belonging. So we're in a bind. We're in a terrible double bind. Because if I give away what is as it is, I have no guarantee the person is going to accept it as it is. If I give away what I've created and I know they'll accept that, then I give them that, and at some later point in time, they're saying, who are you and where did you hide this person that I was in a relationship with? And it'd be a fair question. It'd be very much of a fair question. So, a couple different things as far as intimacy goes. The first one is, why is it so important? And why is it so important is not a easy answer, quite honestly, because ultimately the only way that we can experience love in any way is to be known. And the same thing is true for growth. It is absolutely essential for growth. All of you guys, being the expert psych students that you are, know about the Romanian orphans. After the fall of the Iron Curtain, and 50 orphans to one caregiver. And they were all fed and cared for, but a lot of them died because there was no intimacy. They were not known. They were fed as objects, but they were not known, and their growth shows it even today. We have kids that we often refer to as failure to thrive kids. They are the essence of, without being known who they are, the full extent of who they are, then they fail to thrive. They don't grow. They have cognitive development that's delayed. They have physical development that is delayed. They have all areas of their lives that are impacted as a result of a lot of that. And so it ultimately is essential for growth. The second part of it is that it is essential for love, as I said. Good old Oscar. And the nature of love and its impact on us is not some insipid, pallid kind of version. This is the kind of, G.K. Chesterton referred to God's love of us as a furious longing, a furious love of us. And that is really tough to absorb because we have all the obstacles, all the things that are standing between us and being known as we are. And that phrase will be heard over and over and over again. You've already heard it because the biggest trust issue we have, the biggest thing we have to work on to trust is that God loves us as we are, not as we should be, because we're never going to be who we should be. And that comes up over and over and over again in terms of it is absolutely essential for love. I cannot be loved without being known. And if I am, then I probably should question the nature of what that love actually is. So it is essential for that. Leo Buscaglia, a couple different quotes that I have for you. And the first one's from Leo Buscaglia. He's a therapist and a philosopher of sorts. And he says this, he says, some people are convinced that they are emotionally safe when they remain guarded, unexposed, and thick-skinned. They are cautious not to truly reveal themselves for fear in being seen for who they are. They will be exposed and ultimately left defenseless. Protected and unassailable, their relationships never go beyond a superficial level. At the same time, they lament the absence of deep intimacy necessary for love. And in a sense, we have succeeded if we do not allow the scars of experience to cause us to develop a thick and impenetrable skin. When we gain the insight, this is the money phrase here, when we gain the insight, I missed that, where is it? There it is. When we gain the insight to realize that vulnerability is the soul of love, we will surely heal and try again. Now, as you reflect on going through this class and going through groups and all the things that came up as a result of that around vulnerability, this is a jarring quote, because vulnerability is the soul of love. Not only is it being loved, it's being vulnerable enough to allow ourselves to be loved. Somebody can offer it to us, but we're not available for it because of fear or because of control or because of any number of things, shame that you can add into the picture that is very much a part of it. So it is important for growth, it is important for love, and finally it is important and essential for community. We spend a lot of time crowing about community around here. But to what degree are people actually known? Because the degree of community can really be little more than a cooperative or a coalition of people around a single goal rather than a true community of people. And so the thing to keep in mind is something that I talk a lot about when I talk about circles of community, because ultimately where we start is our intimates. These are a relatively small group of people that are part of our community. They are the ones that know the most personal information about us, and there really is no reason to have everybody in there. If that's the case, then we have been so dissipated that we are really not known. But when there are few people that are part of this intimate group of mine, then they are the ones that can enter into my world. And I have allowed them, I have given them entry into my world. So intimates are the first circle of community that I'm a part of. The next one going out are what we might refer to as best friends. They know a lot about us, but they do not know the material that the intimates know. And so they are fundamentally still a big part of our community. When you put all of this together, best friends and intimates, we are talking about still a relatively small group of people. It is not a lot. A lot of times people get so dissipated, if you will, like I said before, with so many people that they are really known by no one. And actually, in a lot of cases, people are a lot like people are a lot like Voldemort. And the reason I say that, hang with me, I've got a reason for that. How did he protect himself? Anybody know? Say it. Yeah. You don't want to admit you know it. How did he protect himself? He split his soul. Say it. Into Horcruxes, right? And he put them in different places where nobody could have all of him in one place. Sounds a little bit like a stained glass, doesn't it? So we separate ourselves and give pieces of ourselves to various people, but no one person or a small group of people know it all. They know all of the story. They know all of what motivates us to the degree that we know it, because I can't share what I don't know. They may be allowed into our lives enough to actually notice things that we don't notice, and they have entry and invitation to allow from us to allow us to know what they know and what they see, as hard as it is. And so intimates and best friends, and then acquaintances. Acquaintances are people that are familiar to us, but we don't know very much information. They don't know very much information about us. So they're part of this community. You can, in a lot of ways, I think, even when we think about the community we have here, a lot of people are acquaintances. There are relatively few that fall into that best friends or intimates category. And some of those you may or may not know. Now, the one thing, I can give you a very good example of this because it's very present to me right now, is intimates. I have one very good friend. We're entering the hardest part of the year for me right now because in December, he started to decline considerably. Ultimately, that decline led to him dying in March. We were friends for 34 years. When he left, when he died, he took a lot of me with him. And as you can tell, it's still there. It's still there. Intimates are worth the investment. I would never regret that. But the space they leave behind is what allows us to find depth in relationships. It's not empty at all. If anything, it grows dramatically, almost multiplied in a lot of ways. And so our intimates are the ones that are going to carry information for us and about us that we value, and sometimes we forget. They're the voices that remind us of being loved. You know, they're the voices that are that we play that role as well, and that's what makes it so significant. I think in a lot of ways, we need those people for depth. If I live way out here with all of these people and never develop that, then we end up having an empty core, and we feel it. We feel it. We end up feeling empty is the word that oftentimes people will use. So the circles of community are important. They give us depth. They give us a capacity to love. They give us actually the strength and even the willingness to risk vulnerability. And people will come and go throughout that. I'm of the age and at the place that not too many people are going to be moving into that intimate place. They're not. And that's the reality that's there. At the place that you're at developmentally, there are going to be lots of people moving back and forth between these circles. That's normal. That is very much a normal part of the process, but it's an important part of the process in terms of either jading us to be cynical about love and connection and intimacy, or to, as Biscaglia said, either I can grow this thick skin that keeps me safe from other people, or I learn from the experience and understand that the soul of love is vulnerability and it's worth the risk. So the last, it's not really a circle, but it's the context, it's just everyone else. People come and go in our lives in a variety of ways. And we meet them, and there's no real relationship. There's probably a temporary one based on some service they might provide or other things that they are involved in or whatever. But that really is a part of that. But we live in a variety of circles here. Because wherever I am in this intimate, I still have access to the best friends and the acquaintances and everybody else. And I can carry on a conversation that sounds very best friend-like with somebody who's in this acquaintance. But that's what, like I said, that's what gives us some sense of depth and actually accessibility to be known. And so many of you probably have heard the C.S. Lewis quote, but I thought I would remind you. He says, to love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything in your heart will be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give it to no one, not even an animal. This is one of the reasons why animals are such a challenge. Because it's the one being in our world that offers us love unconditionally. Wrap it carefully around with hobbies and little luxuries, and avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safe in the casket or coffin of your selfishness, but in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will change. It will not be broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. To love is to be vulnerable. C.S. Lewis. Great minds think on similar tracks. We always end up back at the truth. And vulnerability and love are always connected. Now, that's not full vulnerability with people that are outside of that best friend circle. Obviously, vulnerability can be very conditional in certain cases, in certain situations. But ultimately, to experience love, vulnerability is absolutely necessary. So the question that I would leave you with, and this is not a real long talk, because you've already gone through all the hard stuff. But the question I would leave you with is, what kind of relationship or community do you want? The second question I would have is, what kind of community or relationship do you create? Both questions are important. Because oftentimes we look for a relationship or a community that we can't seem to create ourselves. And we need to look at both. Because our tendency is to create what we know, not create what we desire. And so what kind of relationship or community do you want? One alternative is what I call a you should community. This is what you should do. This is how you should live. This is the way you should think. This is how you should feel. And we lapse into these communities. And what that ultimately does is it creates the barriers around those circles of community to be so impenetrable and so uncrossable that people just get discouraged and leave. You should, as you've already found out, is it creates a false standard that will never be defined. The other alternative is something that I call the Me Too community. Am I creating a Me Too community? What does that mean? You know, the funny thing about it is Jesus did this. This is God of the universe. He created a Me Too community. You know why? Because he put on human flesh. That was the first Me Too thing he did. And he was born as a questionable bastard son of two young people that weren't even married. And you can bet in the little village of Nazareth, when he walked around, there would probably be whispers, there's that son of Mary and Joseph. So if we ever feel ostracized or left out or on the outside, Jesus can ultimately say, me too. I know what that feels like. And being abandoned and betrayed, obviously, by his best friend. All of the things of his life were a testimony to him saying, me too. Not, me too, it's okay, everything's going to be fine. But me too, I'm on the journey with you, let's do it together. And we create, the community that we're in oftentimes is not the community we create. And that same thing is true in the kinds of things, the questions we ask, the kinds of things and the ways that we connect, the way that we reflect back to somebody else of what we hear rather than telling them what they should think. And we don't do that in those terms. We don't do that in those terms. But so many folks that have come into my office or other people I've talked to, and they say, I want some advice, and I'll say, I won't give it to you. Because I can't live your life. I'm not you. We can talk through what your alternatives are, and you can make the choice, and I can support you in that. But that's a me too thing. It's not just saying those words. Those words are not magic. It's like, yeah, I get it. Because as I have said to you guys in other classes, maybe the three most powerful words is help me understand. It's not about I understand. You can't understand. You can't. So please don't say that to somebody. I understand. You can't. I can certainly see the pain that's created. I can see the struggle that somebody has. I can see even the tears. Most of the time, so many cases, I say this in grief and loss. It's really odd to me how many times tears show us up. How many people, don't raise your hands, but how many people, what was your greatest fear in being in a group? And I'll speak it for you, is I might cry. And it's like, so? How many times as tears rolled down our eyes, and you notice just a moment ago when I got choked up, I was not going to say, I'm sorry to you, because I'm not sorry. I'm not. And so why apologize for our tears? Our tears are the emblem of our love. So that's the challenge. What kind of community are we going to be in? What kind of community are we going to create around us? Because we do create a community. Pay attention to the words that are used and the way that you talk and the things that you listen to and all the other things. You're going to create a community. Not the one that we talk about here at CCU, because that's non-existent. Maybe some that you've experienced in pods and other places and apartments and whatever, that might be closer. But if there's no vulnerability, there's probably not an opportunity for love, because we don't trust anybody, and that's a big part of it. So those are the big questions that I think I would have you think about at the end of all of this, and the nature of what goes into it. The culminating question is this question. Because everything I've talked about up until now, the truth and the nature of truth, remember little t and big T truth that we talked about? And little t is me too stuff. Big T is you should stuff. And then we get to control, and control versus trust. Trust is me too. Control is you should. So we manipulate, manage, point, manage perceptions. It's saying, you should only think this about me. And then we get to boundaries and say, I don't want to say no because I don't want people to be mad. Because I'm not sure I want to be known that well. Because my no will betray what I believe to be true, right? And so the boundaries are an essential part of intimacy. I cannot be intimate with somebody that I am the same as. And the lack of boundaries is that. Similarity and fusion is not intimacy. It's a loss of self. The only way that intimacy can exist is with boundaries. And if we substitute it for closeness or knowledge or any number of things beyond that. And you can keep going, because forgiveness makes intimacy possible. It doesn't mean that I'm going to be close, but at least I will be clear and known for what I value and the things that are important. And then finally, conflict. Conflict reveals us, and that's why we don't like it. Because we don't see things the same way. And we want to control the outcomes, which leads us to certain strategies even of conflict that we talked about last time. So, this is it. Next time that we talk, I will be talking about how do we put this into effect? How do we actually live free? Because that's the essence of Me Too, is I live free. I can still be controlled by other people, if you want to put it that way. But it's more free versus less, rather than no freedom versus enslaved. So, any questions? Okay, well, I've left you enough to think about. I will see you next time.